Love GAA history? Then you'll love going deeper with Over the Bar's Cordia Club membership. For just €5 a month, you'll get exclusive member-only episodes and series, early ad-free access to the main podcast, plus detailed show notes, a newsletter, and the chance to have your questions answered. Join Michael Foley and Ciaran O'Hara as they uncover the stories, the legends, and the questions that shaped our games. Don't just listen, be part of the club. Join now at overthebar.club.
Since the dawn of the GAA in 1884, the telling of its stories have been just as important as the sports. Through the years, heroes and matches have been immortalised, inspiring generation after generation. But some of its most important stories have also gotten lost or turned into legend. And in this series, we will explore some of the GAA's most fascinating forgotten tales, separating rumour from reality and myth from the truth that is often more amazing than the fiction. I'm Michael Foley.
And I'm Ciaran O'Hara.
So join us for Over the Bar, exploring the histories of the GAA.
G.E. Cordia Gael, and welcome to the latest edition of Over the Bar, the Gaelic Games History Podcast. And Mick, we're getting into subject matter here now that is very close to both our hearts in some sense, in that in our professions, the visual side of it is not always the most foremost, but for me, more often than not it is. But quite often, the most iconic images from a major event are the still frame as opposed to the moving picture or the words that are written about it. And today we're going to be talking about one of those moments that's been captured and has just become an iconic photo in the annals of the GAA.
Yeah, exactly. It's a photograph. It's a photograph that was taken during a Munster hurling semi-final between Cork and Tip. And it captures a moment just after Christy Ring has been injured. He's hurt his wrist and he's coming off the field. He's going around behind the back of the goals and his wrist is in a sling. And the umpire is none other than Mick Mackey, the great Limerick hurler, the man who I suppose carried the torch as the greatest hurler of them all until Ring came along, and forever since. The debate was always who was better, Mackey or Ring. And they had a brief period where they would have played against each other, but they didn't come up against each other really directly as such. They wouldn't have marked each other. So it was always a great debate around who was best. But here we have them now. Like Mackey is retired 10 years from Limerick, and Ring is still going. He's still got 5 years left in his career in 1957 with Cork. But he's coming off the field with his arm in a sling, his wrist in a sling. He's hurling in his left hand, and he's looking back at Mackey. And Mackey is there because he's an umpire, and he's got the white coat on.
Got the butcher's coat on, he's leaning back, he seems to be... this image is so iconic.
Yeah, I'm sure people know the one we're talking about, but for anybody who's wondering, how to describe it? So Ring is looking back towards him. Mackey is leaning sort of towards him as though he's just said something, and Ring is responding. But it's the furniture around the two of them as well is so important. You have a man in full Sunday dress suit on his knees in front of the two of them, looking up in a kind of awestruck splendour at this sight that he is seeing this, and he's hearing them talking to each other in what looks like a pretty annoyed way. They're having a pop at each other. And behind them then you have this bank of people, this mass of people, which I suppose, that depicts, the fascination with Cork Tipperary, the allure of the Munster Hurling Championship and all that brings. You've got two of the great titans of that era, of the first 50 years of the 20th century in terms of hurling there with each other. And it has provoked one single question, Ciaran, ever since.
What did Mackey say to Ring?
Exactly.
That's our question this week. Now, to put this in context, and look, we know volunteers in the GAA are the core of the GAA, but Mick Mackey in his retirement is the umpire at this game. Like, it's hard to imagine. Like, think of the distraction that must have caused on the occasions that he did it. Like, it's hard to imagine now. Could you picture TJ Reid coming off and chatting to Joe Canning at the goalpost?
But it's kind of, I don't know, because it's something of its time. If you look at some of the referees that would have been involved then, you had players like Vin Baston, who played for Waterford, was refereeing while he was playing. There's another famous picture of a Kilkenny goalkeeper talking to Laurie Marr by the goalposts in Croke Park during a match. You know, these players, Mackey himself refereed matches in Limerick by 1948. So he effectively retires in 46 from Limerick, comes back as a sub with Limerick in 1947 for the Munster final, but then he's gone. And by 1948, he's managing the Limerick Camogie team. You know, he pops up and all these guys pop up in all sorts of different places. Think of Frank Murphy, you know, Cork County Secretary, still refereeing at that point at a very high level. So it was a different time in terms of guys, you know, didn't really leave the circuit. They didn't really leave the scene as such. They just went and did other things. But this picture, like, I mean, at the time, it was immediately seen to be a special photograph. It was taken for what it's worth. We'll talk about Justin Nelson in a little while. A young photographer from Sligo who was working for the Clonmel Nationalist at the time. It appeared the following Saturday in the Clonmel Nationalist for the first time. That's where it was seen. But very quickly, you know, the Nationalists were engulfed with, you know, requests for prints and copies and what have you. And it very, very quickly becomes one of the greatest sports pictures, Irish sports pictures of all time, Ciaran. But before we get on to what Mackey did say to Ring, because, you know, that's a bit of a cliffhanger we might leave till the end, to give a bit of a context of the game itself, because you mentioned Mackey there as an umpire. This isn't the first most controversial thing that he's involved in this particular game. So
really?
No, absolutely not. So a Munster semi-final, June 30th, 1957. Cork are coming off the back in 1956 of losing the All-Ireland final to Wexford. It was Ring's attempt at winning what would have been then a historic 9th All-Ireland medal. So they're coming off the back of that. They've been in America very soon before this game, and it's remarked that they're very flat in this match.
Are they world champions?
Well, they are not, because Wexford beat them the previous year. Now, they might think they're world champions in their hearts and souls, but Wexford will have something different to say about that. But anyway, they are here now. They look very flat. They're not playing very well. However, Tip are leaking goals by the new time. There's 3 goals gone in by half time. For those of particular Carja members who may have listened to our Hell's Kitchen episode some time back, 2/3 of the Hell's Kitchen full backline are in place here. You have Michael Marr and John Doyle are there, but Mickey the Rattler Byrne is marking Christy Ring, and he does a very good job on him. Now, Mickey the Rattler Byrne was known as a tough defender. The man who is reputed to have coined the phrase when he saw a very light-looking Clare full forward line coming in towards the tip backs, he is reputed to have coined the phrase, "It's time to lower the blade, lads." So this is the kind of citizen you're dealing with here and that Ring is dealing with. But as I say,
Tipperary's Grim Reaper.
He's absolutely sharpening his scythe at the sight of poor Jimmy Smith and these lads coming in from Clare. But anyway, Mackey has already been involved in controversy in this game even before half-time. So 27 minutes gone, a few minutes before half-time, tip player called Musha Maher, if you like, Musha Maher, sends a ball in on the Cork goalie, Mick Cashman. Mick Cashman catches it. But in the process of catching it, of course, in the style of the time, he's barged into the net by a bunch of Tipperary forwards. So Mackey looks over.
So who gets the credit for the pushover try on that one?
Well, no one gets the credit for it, because what happens is Mackey looks at the other umpire. He sees the other umpire nod. So Mackey picks up the green flag and waves it. Next thing, most of the Cork team are down, incensed, enraged, going, "No, I meant Mick Cashman threw the ball out over the line before he was bundled over. It's a 65. Or 70, of course, it would have been that time. We didn't have the metrics at that stage. Including Ring, by the way. Ring nearly came the whole length of the field to protest this decision. Eventually, the referee comes down, order is restored, and the goal is disallowed, and Tip get his 65. But apparently, the pulling and the physical stuff between then and half-time is absolutely vicious. So they get to half-time.
You'd like to have seen Justin Nelson's negatives for some of the clashes that were occurring behind play, wouldn't you?
I'd say the censor was brought in there. I'd say the pick editor had a look and go, "Justin, we just cannot But this kind of stuff, this is nearly snuff violence that we're seeing here. No, that's not going in the Clonmel Nationals this weekend. Anyway, half-time, consternation in the Tipperary dressing room with the concession of so many goals. So they sub out the goalkeeper. Blackie Kane was his name. We have Mushamar, Ciaran, and Blackie Kane. It's a good era for nicknames in the Tip team. And he's replaced in goals by Ned McLaughlin. Now, Ned McLaughlin is making his championship debut. And the very first thing Ned McLaughlin has to do, he stands in the goal, second half, ball is thrown in, there's a clash, Ring takes possession of the ball, about 65 yards out, hits a kind of speculative one in towards the goals. McLaughlin is watching the ball coming in, goes, that's going wide, and the next thing he looks, and the ball is after nipping in by the inside post. Goal. Fourth goal. So Cork are more or less home free at that point. John D. Hickey and the Independent, in the way that they, I think, happened a bit with Ring by this stage. He says, Ring, the hurling sorcerer, must have put a spell on that ball. Rather than the goalie just completely misjudging a harmless-looking ball coming in from 65 yards out. No. There had to be some, sprinkle of magic on that shot. I mean, goalie should have stopped it. But anyway, Cork win the game reasonably comfortably. Tip make a bit of a comeback late on. The reason they make a comeback late on is because with 15 minutes to go, Michael Maher is in a collision with Ring.
Now, reasonably comfortable, but the score is 5-2 to 111. So,
yeah,
I mean,
but they were well ahead. It was like 5-2. I think Tip got like 1-1 or 1-2 in the last 5-10 minutes to make it look a bit better than it was. But anyway, Ring gets knocked over by Michael Maher, falls awkwardly on his wrist. He breaks 2 bones. And this is where we join Justin Nelson on the sideline with his camera. As Ring is going off with his wrist in a sling, Mackey says something, Ring reacts, Justin snaps the picture, and into history it goes. But Cork are very subdued, by the way, without Ring. Don't play well for the last 15 minutes at all. And almost immediately after the game, it's accepted that Ring is, whatever's wrong with him, he's unlikely to be ready for the Munster final in a couple of weeks against Waterford. And true enough, his wrist is diagnosed as broken. He goes to Barrington's Hospital in Limerick first and then on to the Bonds in Cork City. He's ruled out by the Tuesday, July the 2nd. The Evening Echo's reporting Ring's wrist is broken in 2 places. It's in plaster. But they're already asking him, are you going to retire now? And he's like, no, I'm not going to retire. No, I'm fine. Jim Tough Barry, the iconic old Cork trainer, is wheeled out to reinforce this. No, he'll be back next year. Don't worry. There's letters to the newspaper saying, put Ring on the bench for the Munster final, even if he can't play. Just put him there in case. Like the Lord Mayor visits Ring in hospital. Billy Rackard and Seamus Hearn, 2 Wexford hurlers, are coming back from America by boat. It docks in Cork Harbour, and they get out, and immediately they want news of Ring. Like it's all about Christy and his health and this. He's in there, Ciaran. He's in there for nearly 10 days. He's only discharged on the 9th of July. I'm not sure. Maybe they had to reset the wrist or maybe had to do an operation on it. I don't know. But anyway, he's in there for 9 days. He's let out. He goes to the final as a spectator. Cork lose. And Waterford go on to the All-Ireland final, which is won by Kilkenny. But it's interesting, when you think of the longevity of the man, it's 17 years in 1957 since Ring's first Munster final in 1940, which was actually against Limerick. Mackey would have been playing. He's played in 14 Munster finals in that time. So, it's just one very tiny way of illustrating the longevity of this man. At a county board meeting around this time, it was said that it may well have been the first time that Ring missed a match for Cork due to injury. And it does have an impact on the final. Padraig Purcell pulls out the old line about, Munster final with Cork without Ring is like Hamlet without the Prince. It definitely has a depressing effect on the whole affair. But not that Waterford cared, they go on. So back to our photograph. It appears, as I say, on July the 6th, 1957, the following weekend, in the Clonmel Nationalist and the Munster Times. The version that we know is the one that we just described, Ciaran, with the Mackey and Ring and the man kneeling, looking up, and the crowd behind. It originally appeared in the sports pages of the Nationalist, in the bottom half of the page, cropped into a 2 or 3 column picture. So kind of like portrait rather than landscape, I suppose, if you want to put it that way. The kneeling man is out of it. And to me, the kneeling man is as important a figure in this picture as Mackey and Ring, because that's everybody else looking at these two. But anyhow, that's how it appeared initially. As I say, immediately caught the imagination. Huge surge of orders to the Nationalists for prints. It was taken, as I say, by Justin Nelson. But Justin Nelson, Ciaran, you would know Justin Nelson.
Well, I know of Justin Nelson because he went on to become a very important figure in sports television production.
Exactly. At this time, he's a photographer with the Clonmel Nationalist. This was his... I wouldn't say it's his first love, because he grew up wanting to be a photographer but also make movies. So he's always been interested in visuals. He was born in 1936 in a place called McGurk, near 5 Mile, born in Sligo. His father was a local school principal, Peter Nelson, and he went to school in Summerhill College in Sligo. And as I say, he was already by then interested in photography, making movies and so on. He joined the Nationalist as their staff photographer. He went down. You can imagine, it's a long way to go, Sligo to Clonmel. Like,
it's a distance.
Digs, it is. First digs were with Mrs. O'Brien on the Powerstone Road in Clonmel. If anybody from the area knows that place, he was on the Powerstone Road. The rent was £3 a week. He was making £5 a week. So, he didn't have much left. But I suppose in 1957, what was he? 21. I mean, what a photograph to take at 21. So he was there until the early 60s. He joins RTE in 1961 as a cameraman. And I mean, when you start to look down, as you say, his influence on RTE and on programming, like he worked on the Late Late Show when it started. He covered JFK's visit. In the mid-1960s, he became a producer-director. He was responsible for RT's sports coverage after that. He directed 18 All-Ireland finals. He covered the Pope's visit in 1979. He was still there. Like, he also covered Queen Elizabeth's visit in 2011. He actually gave her a picture that he must have taken with the Nationalist of Princess Margaret and her husband arriving at Shannon Airport in 1960. So that was, talk about circles and circles. He went into general programming in the mid-80s, but even then, he oversaw, remember Superstars, that show, the sports show? He was responsible for the Nissan Classic.
Yeah, and the Nissan Classic is one of those sports broadcasts that was pretty revolutionary at the time, because if you think about it, televised cycling really was just the grand tours at that time. But between himself and people we've referenced before, Michael O'Carroll and Maurice Reedy, the Irish 5-day cycling tour used to get some coverage.
It was huge. Now, it was in the era of Roach, Kelly, Kimmage, Martin Early. So it had that. But no, you're right. If I remember rightly back then, even the Tour de France, we'd say on Channel 4 and things, it would have been highlights, really, wasn't it? Maybe it live.
It was live.
It was live by the late 80s.
It is a technical challenge because, unlike any other sporting event, it occurs over hundreds of miles.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
It's not like Formula One or racing where they're in a circuit and they do laps. You've got it's a serious technical challenge. And we've spoken before about the Sunday game having technical challenges. Right, well, imagine if it's played between Cork and Clonmel.
Incredible. I remember we're going off on a tangent here, but I do remember, maybe you said it, maybe you were telling me about it, but the coverage even of the Tour de France, I think now it's drones that follow, the overhead shots as drones as they go along, but they're gathering those shots, beaming those to a satellite or whatever, and then they're beamed back down to the ground to a truck. And so the drone has to keep following them all the way along. It's an enormous technical sort. Anything could possibly go wrong in this thing. So that's now. So in the 80s, it was off the charts. But so Justin wrote a couple of books over his time. One about Michael Collins. He wrote a memoir. It was interesting, actually. Mentioned that he grew up in 5 Mile, born in Sligo, kind of Calgary area, I think, Ciaran. But Ray McManus, who people might be aware of, Ray McManus, who was created Sports File, the photography agency. You'll see Ray at every GA match he can possibly get to, even now still. Ray McManus's mother was born and reared less than half a mile from Nelson. So you had Ray McManus, one of the most influential GA photographers of all time. His roots are so close to Justin Nelson's, who took one of the most influential GA photographs of all time.
Love GEA history? Then you love going deeper with Over the Bar's Cordia Club membership. For just €5 a month, you'll get exclusive member-only episodes and series, early ad-free access to the main podcast, plus detailed show notes, a newsletter, and the chance to have your questions answered. Join Michael Foley and Ciaran O'Hara as they uncover the stories, the legends, and the questions that shaped our games. Don't just listen, be part of the club. Join now at overthebar.club.
So that's essentially the story of the photograph. That's where it appeared. But as I said, like the talk of, well, what did they say to each other has gone on ever since. But what interested me, Ciaran, is the relationship between these two men. I mean, you've got two, I don't know, who would you compare them to now? Like, I mean, you're talking, if you were comparing Henry Shefflin with who?
Oh, like, you put me on the spot there, but I mean...
Well, it's whoever you want, isn't it? It's like you compare Shefflin with, you think TJ Reid is the next one up, or...
Well, no, because it's you've got to pick someone from another county. So, you know, it might be like Shefflin and Brian Wheelahan.
Yeah, I think Wheelahan is probably the best example, even in terms of Wheelahan coming into the winter of his career as Shefflin is reaching his peak. Ring was like that with Mackey. Like there are similarities between them just in their background. Like they both drove for a living, for example. Ring drove an oil truck for Shell. Mackey drove a van for the ESB. Mackey was born in 1912. He's the son of Tyler Mackey, who we've mentioned in the previous
before.
Podcast. Comes from great hurling stock. He passes away in 1982, so he lives to the ripe age of 70. Ring is born in 1920. He died suddenly of a heart attack, of course, in 1979. If you look at their careers, their hurling careers, Mackey with Limerick, you're talking 1929 to 46, really, but I'm going to say 47 because they did bring him back as a sub. Ring, 39 to 62. Enormous lengths of time, both of them. Mackey lived in Ardnacrusha. Ring was in Cork City, so rural, urban. When you look at them as hurlers, we'll get into that in a second, but just as people, Jimmy Smith, who I mentioned actually just in passing there earlier, former great Clare forward, he said they were totally different people, like personality-wise and hurling-wise.
And obviously he'd have played with both and against both, between Munster interprovincial teams and coming up against them in the Munster Hurling Champ.
Exactly. And they never struck anybody as being close because, like you mentioned, Munster, they would have shared dressing rooms. They would have shared dressing rooms with Munster. But people would have said that they just shared the odd word here and there, the odd remark, whatever. There were like Mackey seems to have been drawn more to the older Cork players from the previous era to Ring. And actually at the Railway Cup games, he would have been known to have a drink with the Leinster players afterwards, rather more so than we'd say other people. Ring, very intense. Mackey, much more cavalier in his personality. Much more cavalier. Professor William Murphy, actually in DCU, who's a Limerick man himself, put it very, very well, I think, in a very simple way. He said, Mackey was the kind of lad that you'd have a second pint with. Ring, maybe not so much. You wouldn't be sure. If we look at them as hurlers,
as you describe Ring, he just brings to mind a certain other Cork sporting personality in many ways.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very interesting. There's a book that was written by Dave Hannigan called We Need to Talk About Roy. And very early in that book, he makes a comparison between how Keane was treated in his home city and how Christy Ring was treated in his home city. And the attitude and the outlook. I mean, I know sports psychologists who look at Keane, but they also look at Ring and how Ring talked about the game and what can be learned from how Ring approached the game.
And even your descriptions of like the Evening Echo and when he's in hospital. I worked in Cork for a summer in the 90s on building sites, and I remember it was the summer when Roy Keane was moving from Nottingham Forest to, at that time, they thought Blackburn Rovers. And you know, when you see those outside news agents, those signs that have the headlines for the day, like for 2 weeks, it was like, where's Roy going? He was the story of the city. So, you know, that's how sports stars are embraced in the city of Cork.
Exactly. And the similarities between Keane and Ring, I have no doubt, are something we'll get into the weeds of that some other time. But we'll get into the weeds of Mackey and Ring here. If we look at them as hurlers, and for us now, I think that's important because we don't have a whole lot of footage of either of them playing. And we don't have a great sense really now of the contrast between these two. I'm going to put it, it's not as simple as this, but to put it in very, very basic terms, you're probably talking about Mackey and power hurling versus Ring, more of a stylist. That would be and I mean, Mackey was an outstanding hurler and Ring was as tough as pig iron. But just in a very simple way, that's probably the distinction. Eamon Young, who would have been a teammate of Ring's, he said there were two entirely different temperaments. For example, he talked about Mackey. He said Mackey could turn on a pin and then he would crash through defenders. Like he would just throw guys off him straight through, great pace, score a goal, and he would not be... he wouldn't mind coming out and giving the defender a tap on the way out, as so to say. Look, do you see that now? He loved the daring of it all. He loved being able to stick it to the opposition. He loved the spectacle. He loved to solo the ball. Like he just enjoyed the whole experience of it. Ring, as a hurler, he was much smaller than Mackey, height wise and weight wise. I think Mackey in his prime was 12 stone 3 pounds. When Ring started, he was 3 stone lighter than that. So in that era, there was no point. Ring never tried to go through players. He always tried to go around them. Mackey, actually, in Cork, like they would have seen Mick Mackey as the perfect full forward, but Mackey always wanted to be in the thick of things. So he never wanted to play full forward. He wanted to throw the ball in the hurley and just solo through defences, throwing guys off him, and classic Munster hurling stuff. Ring only ever soloed to make space for himself, to go into space, and then he would do whatever he wanted to do.
And again, like the images we have of Ring when you see him in a photo with the ball on the end of his hurl, you can see that he's shifting balance. So it's him looking for space. He's usually off stride.
Yes, exactly. He's moving. It's like he's a move ahead. The solo is not what he's interested in. It's what he's going to do next. Whereas for Mackey, the solo and the spectacle and the sight of Mackey just blasting through like a wrecking ball through defences was so big for Limerick. Whereas with Ring, it was different. It was cunning. It was grace and cunning with Ring. How was he going to outdo the other guy, John Quirke was a Cork defender of the era. He would have marked them both, obviously. Club with Ring, and then would have marked Mackey in plenty of inter-county games. He said that Mackey didn't have Ring's movement, which I think is understandable from what we've even talked about. He wasn't as graceful because he didn't need to be. He picked out Ring as the tougher opponent. He said Ring was a classic wing forward, if you like, and Mackey was your classic centre forward. Space versus making space. Dr. Jim Young actually said that, I should say. He would have been a brother of Eamon Young's. He said Ring was the better hurler. You would say pound for pound, but he couldn't run like Mackey. He didn't have that pace and power that Mackey had. But in terms of their kind of when they crossed paths, interesting enough, it's kind of gone down in history that Ring's first game for Cork was a league game against Kilkenny in the autumn of 1939. His first game for Cork was actually in the spring of 1939 against Limerick, in a game that's kind of been lost to history a little bit as either a league or a challenge match. That's the memory of Ring himself. He couldn't remember it was a league or a challenge game. Looking back at the records from the time, and I have to say, it doesn't mention Christy Ring coming on, but that would not be unusual.
He's a debutant, for after all.
Exactly, and he comes on as a sub in a game that Limerick have absolutely plastered Cork in. It's a league match in early 1939, in February 1939. Limerick win it 8-2 to 3-2. And by Ring's account, he's sent on, he's kind of basically asked, do you want to go in for a run? And he goes, yes, I do. So they send him in. Mackey is in his pomp, by the way, in this game. He's been, doing all the magic stuff that he does. And Ring is, during the game, Ring is actually just watching a ball go over the bar for Limerick when he gets an unmerciful bang across the ankles from a Limerick player. And, he, first of all, it's an introduction to inter-county hurling at that time. You can just get smacked like that when the ball is at the complete other end of the field. And Ring retaliates, though, which tells Limerick that this guy, he's a kid, he's tiny, but he's not to be messed with. So beyond that, like Mackey, for example, doesn't recall Ring's championship debut against Limerick in 1940. He did remember that Peter Cregan marked him. Peter Cregan would have been a very nimble, light defender as well. But Ring remembered those. It was a draw and a replay in 1940, and he remembered them as the most frightening games and the toughest Munster final he ever played in. So it left a mark on him. We did an episode last week, Aaron, a members episode on the bicycle final of 1944, which was between Cork and Limerick, where we talked about the Cork-Limerick rivalry. And without wanting to go back over all that again, suffice it to say that between 1939 and about 1947, Limerick Cork was the defining rivalry in Munster. They met almost every single year. In the totality of it, Cork definitely got the better of them overall, but some of the games are absolutely titanic. And it's an era when Ring is coming into his prime and Mackey is gone past his prime. But they are on the pitch at the same time. When Mackey talks about himself as a hurler in this era, he says, I suppose I was a cool class of character, he said. It was good crack. Now, he's talking about this in the 1970s. He says, all the fun has gone out of hurling nowadays, he says. Maybe there's too much of a build-up now. And then he says of Ring, he said, maybe Ring didn't get as much fun out of it. Mackey was all chat on the field as well. He was, like I said there, he wouldn't be averse like to, scoring a goal and pointing it out to the defender on the way out. And he was always chatting to lads. I'm not going to say trash talking, but he's in their ear all the time. Whereas Ring, surprisingly enough, you'll be shocked to hear, Ciaran, said nothing to no one. Here's a quote from Ring about this. And he's not, he is just talking about this. He's not talking about Mackey here, by the way. He says, I never put any thoughts to anybody. Everybody is too busy with his own thoughts to be thinking about anybody else. If you go out with an honest belief that this is a sport and that the man you are on is just a rival, there is no need to talk to anybody. You have to give your opponent credit for the good talents he had, and you have got to counteract them. I found that the people that tried to needle you by talk were the most vulnerable. Gimmickry doesn't solve anything. I know which guy I prefer anyway.
Yeah, they've both got their merits.
You're like the devilment of Mick Mackey. Well, it's hard to resist, isn't it? It's hard to resist the devilment of Mick Mackey. But Cork Limerick have great encounters in this era. They are rival captains for the 1946 Munster final, and there is a picture of the two of them at the toss. And you can see, this is Mackey's last year effectively with Limerick, and he is older and he's heavier than the pictures you see of him in the 1930s. Whereas Ring is in his prime. He may still be 3 stone lighter than Mackey at this stage, but he's packed on a bit of power. And, that's the other interesting thing, actually, about it being a wrist injury in 1957. The one thing that people always said in that time was that Ring had enormous, powerful wrists. He was only 5'9", but he had these enormous wrists. And people would always say that's where he got his power from as a striker. So even from a Cork perspective, to see Ring fell... It's
probably from the striking that he got the enormous wrists, but...
Well, probably. Well, yes, one fed the other. But, think of it, if of all injuries for Ring to get, a broken wrist is the one that will, it means something a bit more than, a pulled hamstring or a broken leg or something. It's the wrist that's broken here. But anyway, that's back in 1957.
Love GEA history? Then you love going deeper with Over the Bar's Cordia Club membership. For just €5 a month, you'll get exclusive member-only episodes and series, early ad-free access to the main podcast, plus detailed show notes, a newsletter, and the chance to have your questions answered. Join Michael Foley and Ciaran O'Hara as they uncover the stories, the legends, and the questions that shaped our games. Don't just listen, be part of the club. Join now at overthebar.club.
In 1946, he scores a very famous goal. Like, Cork beat Limerick in that final, and Ring goes on to score a very famous goal in the 1946 All-Ireland final against Kilkenny, where he basically slaloms through the Kilkenny defence for about 60 yards and smacks it into the net. Of course, in the telling, it gets, you add 5 yards for every decade with the telling of that one. But anyway, it is one of the iconic goals, one of the great goals. And it is that moment, I suppose, where you have Mackey is at the end in 46, Ring scores the great goal, and there is a sense of the torch being passed from one to the other. Not that the debate over which one was better will ever end, but just the sense that Ring is now the totemic figure in hurling is absolutely defined by that goal in 46. If we look at their time against each other, 39 to 47, again, 47 is a soft sort of one for Mackey. In championship, Ring scored 464 for Cork across that time. Mackey scored 1030 for Limerick. Now, there's only 16 points in the difference there, and you have to think that Cork were playing a lot more games because they were getting to more All-Ireland semi-finals and finals and what have you. So Mackey is probably pound for pound doing better than Ring in this era, even though it's the end of his career. But beyond that, Ciaran, there is no real relationship.
How often do they meet?
Not often. Like, they're at opposite ends of the province. Like, Ring he goes to the 50th anniversary celebrations for a hand GA. He meets them there. When Mackey is inaugurated into the GA Hall of Fame in 1962, Ring is at that function, and he meets Mackey, and he meets Mrs. Mackey, Kathleen Mackey, and she actually remarks that she found him very, very shy, very different to the person she expected him to be. But there is deep respect there, clearly, because when Ring dies suddenly in 1979, it's a period when Mackey himself is quite ill, not well, but he insists on going to the funeral. And in 1966, he was asked the question, what forwards would you pick from your time lived that you would like to have played with? And he does pick Jimmy Langton from Kilkenny, with Jackie Power, who he did play with from Limerick, and Ring. So, he's asked, what was it that made Ring great? And he said it was his dedication. It was his dedication. He said he was more of a ball player than a physical hurler, which again, I suppose, speaks to what, the comparison between the two. Mackey sees it as much as everybody else does. But in terms of their relationship, Val Dorgan, who was a journalist and a teammate of Ring's with the Glen, wrote a book about Christy Ring after Ring's death, where one of the chapters is dedicated entirely to the comparison between Mackey and Ring. And he goes and talks to Mackey. Now, even Val Dorgan, it's a very interesting chapter in one sense, because Dorgan is kind of, he is a product of his era. He's a guy who grew up as a contemporary of Ring's, who would have seen Mackey as the enemy, would have seen him as
a competitor.
A competitor. And Mackey has also always been quite difficult, no more than Ring, difficult for the media to get a handle on. He doesn't really go for their deep probing questions about what makes you great and this, that, and the other. It's a bit more straight up and straight down. He kind of, I certainly get the impression from this conversation with Dorgan that interviews bore him, and you really have a very limited amount of time where you can get any sort of insight from him into anything. So like Dorgan spends a couple of hours with him in his home in Ardnacrusha, and he's trying to talk about Ring, but Mackey keeps deflecting it off to other places, and it's only in little bits and pieces like that there, like I said there about Mackey feeling that Ring didn't get as much out of the game, much enjoyment out of the game as Mackey did. That was said to Val Dorgan. There's little bits and pieces here and there, but the sense is that they certainly admired each other. Mackey says they played against it. They did mark each other, he said, in a tournament game, a club tournament game. And what Val Dorgan notices is that Mackey has as much of a sharp recall of his career as Ring would have had. So Mackey recalls this game from 1948, just a tournament game between Glen Rovers and Ahan. Mackey would have been retired from Limerick by this stage. But Mackey recalls it as Jack Lynch and Christy Ring at midfield versus Mackey and Timmy Ryan, who would have been a Limerick player as well in Mackey's era. And he said it was ball for ball, he said, but I had the better of it on that day against Ring. But anyway, he said it wasn't an important game, so, who cares? But I went back and had a look, because those club games were reported quite extensively, because we had no club championship that time, Ciaran. So if Ahan were playing Thurles Sarsfields or the Glen were playing something, it was reported on. It was an event. I can find no reference to this at all anywhere. I'm not saying it didn't happen. If Mick Mackey in the late 70s said it happened, I'm more than happy to go with that. But what I can tell you is that they did play a series of challenge games, tournament games against Ahan, the Glen, in the spring of 1947. So on March 30th, 1947, Ahan came to the UCC grounds for a game against the Glen, which the Glen won 5-6 to 4-3. Now, Ring did not play in that game, but Mackey is in full-on circus tricks mode. Like, the Examiner are very excited and the crowd are delighted with him. The Examiner reporters that the great personality of Mick Mackey, the Limerick captain, made a great appeal to the large crowd. Time and again, he received an ovation as he showed all his old tricks and perfect ball control. And the Glen went up to Limerick a few weeks later for a return game, which the Glen won again. Still no Ring. So they definitely played in 47. Mackey says they played in 48 and marked each other at midfield. I'm not denying that happened. I cannot find any record of it anywhere. But as I said, the respect was there. There's absolutely no question about it.
So back to the picture, because, it has become iconic. It's unusual that it's Like it's from a local newspaper in South Tipperary, you know what I mean? And it's become one of the most enduring images in the GA's history. How much speculation has there been over the years about what was said? Because we've all seen memes at this stage now in the new age of the two of them talking to each other.
Oh, sure, look at it forever and ever. Like someone asked Mackey one time, what did Ring say? And he said, oh, I wouldn't tell that to the Bishop of Limerick. Like in 2012, HoganStand.com ran a caption competition. Now, I'm not going to repeat some of the captions because not that they're obscene or anything like that. They're just completely and utterly unfunny. Like, it's the worst caption competition in the history of caption competitions. If you want to go and find it, go look for it. I'm not going to put a link in the show notes. Nothing. It's just not worth it. I'll just tell you the winner, right? The winning caption in 2012 was Mackey saying to Ring, could you hear this man's confession for me, Christy? I've got to get back to the game.
So did we ever really find out what was said?
We did. I'm always slow to tell you because for people watching this and look and you know, find the photograph, have a look at it while you listen to this episode if you haven't already. You probably don't want to know because it may actually detract from the photograph in a way because the power of the photograph is the unknown. What did they say to each other? And then you start to read in more and more into the picture in terms of what it means for the time, what it means about these two greats being captured in this way, the supporter kneeling in front of them, the crowd watching on behind them, all these things. But seeing as you've asked, Ciaran, and it does seem like it would be wrong if I just left it hanging. Michael Moynihan in the Irish Examiner in March 2010 did an interview with a man called Dan Barrett, who was a friend of Ring's. They were connected through, I suppose they had kids of a similar age. They both worked for oil companies, so they would have met each other out on the road and what have you. And they've obviously both enjoyed hurling. So they would have had chats and conversations and things like that. And Barrett actually, the piece gives really great insight into Ring in lots of ways. Like Barrett talks about Ring and the conversations they would have had, that he rarely criticised a player, a contemporary player. I'm talking about matches that are going on. Rarely criticised a player. He once told Barrett that he picked him out of a crowd while Ring was playing a game. So Barrett tells the story about being in the crowd and there's a sideline cut and Ring comes over to take the cut and Barrett, like everybody else, is going, one Ringy boy, on the Rebels, on Cork and all this. And there's a bit of slag in the following week about, Dan, you weren't even at the match, you know, blah, blah, blah. You're saying you were there, you were never there. And Ring says, no, I saw him. And he tells Barrett exactly where he was in the stadium, to a T. So, you know, incredible sort. Again, that speaks to Ring's mindset. Like, he's able to kind of have all these things in his head and order them and still be the player he was. He told Barrett one time he would never be a sub. He would never, ever contemplate coming on as a substitute. Kind of, if he wasn't good enough to start, he didn't want to hurl. Which I suppose is something that maybe only the greatest player of all time can say. That's not something really the rest of us can relate to, I don't think. But
really not.
Really not. Like, and then there's an evening with Dan Barrett and his wife, actually, where the conversation turns to the picture. And Dan asks him straight out, Christy, what did Mackey say to you? And keep in mind now that, like, you know, Mackey's been embroiled in controversy in this game already about a goal that wasn't. There's been, you know, some pretty hard pulling and belting before half time. And it's gone on. Ring's been knocked over by Michael Maher, the great full-back, broke his wrist in two places. It's a typically
the
tough,
axe has been lowered.
The axe has been lowered. The spirit of the Rattler Burn is very strong in this game. And yeah, we know what he said. So, Ciaran, I am going to now, in the spirit of this, invite you to channel the spirit of Mick Mackey. I'll obviously channel the spirit of Ring.
Okay, but I'm not putting on a Limerick accent for this.
Just say the damn line.
Okay.
So he's off the field. He's coming off. He's turned. Mackey is leaning over. And Mackey says to him,
you didn't get half enough of it.
I'd expect nothing less from you.
The mystery is removed.
I don't think there could be ever a better reenactment. I think we absolutely nailed that.
It's pretty flat, really, when after all that, isn't it?
Well, that's what I'm saying. You kind of don't need to know. It's nearly better if you don't know. But we do know, and there it is. But it remains one of, as I say, one of the greatest pictures of Irish sport. I don't know, has there been a greater GA Sports photograph taken, and there have been hundreds of thousands of great photographs taken. But this one is so, so special. I find it hard to imagine just another photograph that just encompasses so much.
I've always wondered, Mick, so I'm delighted you've given us the explanation. I'm a little underwhelmed, if I'm honest, that that's all it was. I was really hoping, given Mick Mackey's reputation for sledging and talk and gimmickry, that he'd have lowered him with something better than that. But thanks for bringing us through all that. It is an iconic image. We will have it in the show notes for our Carja members. You will find it online anywhere you choose to Google what did Mackey say to Ring. So, and that's where we'll leave it. Mick, we have more in store for our Carja Club members. You're going to take us through the story of when there was a rodeo in Croke Park. So if you are a member of the Carja Club, do join us for that. Later in the week, of course, we'll have another bite size where we give you some trivia around matches in the weekend ahead of us. If you are listening in an app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, get up there and rate us, like us, subscribe so that the episodes will land straight in your feed whenever you want them. Until next time, from me, it's Sloan.
Bye-bye.
Love GEA history? Then you love going deeper with Over the Bar's Carja Club membership. For just €5 a month, you'll get exclusive member-only episodes and series, early ad-free access to the main podcast, plus detailed show notes, a newsletter, and the chance to have your questions answered. Join Michael Foley and Ciaran O'Hara as they uncover the stories, the legends, and the questions that shaped our games. Don't just listen, be part of the club. Join now at overthebar.club.